I feel like it was very much taboo to be jealous. It was very much like nobody really talked about it. Even though there was no one right way to do polyamory, there very much was an obvious right way that everyone was aiming for, which is right to never be bothered by anything, to be perfectly happy with everything. And I thought, and I kind of trusted in some of the gurus of people that I'd seen online who were like all, very settled in the, and I just really thought, okay, I've trusted in all of this and I'm going to go for it. And then when it didn't work, I was quite frustrated and quite angry about that. And so I started writing about that. And then as I was writing about things, like it wasn't always very well received. Like a lot of times people would get like frustrated with me or say that I was like saying bad things about polyamory or trying to discourage people from being polyamorous. And even like some of the reviews of my book say that, like, this sounds like somebody who doesn't want anyone to be polyamorous. And it's not that. It's just that I was in such an environment that made me feel like even having feelings about this was wrong and that it meant that I wasn't truly polyam. And what I want people to understand is that it's normal to have these feelings and that it's okay. It doesn't mean that you're not polyam. It just, means that you're a human being who's grown up in a monogamous centric society that has told you your whole life this is how love is.
Welcome to Normalizing Non-Monogamy, the podcast where we interview incredible people from all over the world to hear their personal journeys of self-discovery through the lenses of love, sex, and relationships.
Our mission is to show people that they're not alone and to inspire them to embrace their true selves so that together we can open minds and live authentically without shame.
We believe everyone's story is powerful and beautiful, yet it's important to remember that everyone does life a little bit differently and that the views and opinions expressed by our guests do not necessarily reflect our own.
Additionally, we aren't doctors. Please consult a medical professional for anything regarding your health that you might learn about on the show. Enjoy!
Welcome to episode 394. We're Finn and Emma, and today we have a fantastic conversation with Lola. She is the author of The Anxious Person's Guide to Non-Monogamy, has an advice column and podcast called Non-Monogamy Help, and just published the Non-Monogamy Journal. Links to Lola's website and all of Lola's work can be found in the podcast show notes on our website or in your podcast player.
Yeah, we definitely dig in a bit more to Lola's work and talk about it with her in the interview. But before we do, she takes us inside of her personal journey of exploring non-monogamy, and it really is a beautiful and powerful story today. Lola shares how her motivations and intentions have evolved over time as she's learned about herself, and she also talks about her own personal healing that she's done through exploring non-monogamy and relationships. Again, we really love this conversation, and we're super excited to share it with all of you today. So thank you, Lola, for coming on the podcast and for all of the incredible work you do. Again, a reminder to everybody, you can find links to all of Lola's work in the podcast show notes or over at nonmonogamyhelp.com.
For anyone who's a premium subscriber, we're going to jump right into the interview with Lola now. And for anyone else, we're going to go through a couple of announcements. First up, if you're not familiar with the premium subscription, it's a way to skip these announcements up front, but don't worry, we still share important dates of upcoming events in the outro with all of you. To sign up for the premium subscription, go over to our website, normalizingnonmonogamy.com, scroll down on the homepage, and you can sign up right there.
One of those important dates we've got coming up is actually June 25th. We have a workshop in our community called Releasing the Fear of Abandonment. That's going to be hosted by Orit Krug. You can learn more about that over on our website under the resources tab. There's a link there for the workshops, or if you go under the community tab, you'll find out more information there as well. These workshops are hosted for our community members every month. You get them included. So our virtual community, if you're not familiar, is full of over 300 incredible people from around the world who come together to socialize and support one another all day, every day. We use an app called Mighty Networks. We also have monthly virtual support calls and the workshops that I was just telling you all about.
We also have in-person gatherings a couple times a year, and our next in-person retreat is coming up October 3rd to the 5th in the San Francisco Bay Area. You can find out more, again, over on our website on the community tab.
Yeah, and if this is like, wow, you just said a lot of things about this community, that's right. You get a whole lot of shit for less than $8 a month, so please check it out. We'd love to have you join us. You get workshops, you get community calls, you get in-person stuff. You're not going to want to miss it.
No, you're not.
One more time, you can find out more over under the community tab of our website. Please check it out.
Next up, we wanted to remind all of you that we are going to be at the Soul Play Festival June 12th to the 15th, 2025 in Northern California. We will be hosting our speed friending event there and our workshop, Is There a Right Way to Do Non-Monogamy? We are super excited about this event. Would love to have you come join us if you're in the area or able to travel in. You can find out a lot more about Soul Play Festival over on episode 387 with Holly.
Yeah, and there are links in the podcast show notes as well to Soul Play's website. And if you're like, hey, I'm going to be able to be there, one of those links will save you $50 on your ticket, which is hella awesome. So please check it out. We'd love to have you come join us.
Next up, our favorite way to get tested for STIs. It is stdcheck.com. This is a really discreet and easy way to get tested. It is a service that Finn and I use. We love it. You hear us talking about it all the time. If you use the links on the resources tab of our website, you get $10 off, making a 10-panel test only $129, and you support the podcast. So thank you in advance for using those links, and thank you to anyone who has used them in the past as well.
Yes, and just a quick reminder, the beginning of summer is the best time of year.
Why not?
Why not? Any time of year is the best time of year. So please go get tested, know your sexual health status, and be an awesome sexual health advocate, not a sexual health.
And finally, a reminder, reach out to us. Send us a voicemail, send us an email over on the Contact Us page of our website. We would love to hear from you. And if you'd like to come on the podcast and share your story, you're welcome. Please reach out to us.
You're not just welcome, you are encouraged.
Yes,
you
that's
are
true.
Highly encouraged to come on the show and share your story. You don't have to be an author or have a podcast. You just have to be you. So please, please, please reach out to us. We'll bring you on. We'll share your story, and everybody will feel less alone.
And with that, let's go and talk to Lola. Welcome to the podcast, Lola. We're excited to have you here today and to dive in and chat. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. I really appreciate you having me.
Yeah, we're looking forward to learning more about you and to learn about your work as well. But before we go much further, because we don't know much, do you mind introducing yourself for anybody who's not familiar?
Yeah, sure. So I'm Lola Phoenix. I'm the author of The Anxious Person's Guide to Non-Monogamy. I also write and produce a weekly advice column and podcast called Non-Monogamy Help for people in non-monogamous, open, and polyamorous relationships. I'm also the author of the Non-Monogamy Journal, which has come out in January, which has a lot of different scenarios and things to test out your boundaries and figure out where you stand on different places. And I'm also releasing a book in August called Supporting Someone Polyamorous. So, yeah.
Amazing. Well, and links for anybody listening will be in the show notes or are in the show notes, so you can go check those out. And we'll talk more about what all of these are in a little bit. Maybe let's start with, where you're at today. What do relationships look like today? And then we'll go back in time and figure out maybe what inspired you to sort of dig into all of the information and to start putting it out there for everybody else. So yeah, maybe what does relationship being look like for you today, Lola?
It's actually quite interesting. I am much more solo polyam and kind of solo focused now than I ever have been before. And that's been because I've moved from the UK. I lived in the UK for 12 years. I am originally American, as you can tell from my accent. I moved to the UK around 2010, and I was there for quite a while. And ever since then, for about 3 years, I've been living in Sweden. And that's put forth a lot of different opportunities and possibilities that I didn't have when I was living in London. And so I've been living alone or I've been living, without having to be forced to share my immediate environment with, flatmates and things like that. It's very separated where I live, thankfully. So that's been really, really helpful. And I've never been a kind of polyam person that's been super interested in dating. To be honest, throughout my entire journey, I've kind of been someone who basically I've thought okay, I want the opportunity to be polyamorous because if, in 18 years precisely, when the planets align ever so nicely, I want the ability to pursue a relationship with someone if I'm interested in them. And I don't really get interested in people very often. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of where I differ from a lot of polyamorous experiences that a lot of people have, where they're super interested in lots of people, and that's kind of their modus operandi for getting into polyamory. So now it's more solo polyam. I'd say that in terms of what got me interested and what got me started, sexual health became a very big special interest of mine when I was 18, 19. And I read so much information about it, and it was really healing and helpful because it helped me kind of get over sexual abuse that I'd been through. Like, because I was very sex phobic and very afraid, and learning more about it helped me undo that fear. And it was really, really a positive experience. And then from kind of like those sex positive communities, you end up learning more about swinging, you end up learning more about open relationships. And it just sort of drifted that way. And I think as well, when I started to understand my sexuality more and understand that, oh, wait, I'm not straight, the sort of possibilities of like, oh, well, what if I want to have a girlfriend, and approaching monogamous relationships with people. Originally I was okay with monogamy, but I kind of wanted a monogamish kind of thing. Like, I wanted the opportunity, if I had an ability to have a girlfriend, or if I had even just to have experiences with women, I was like, I would like to have that. And my first kind of relationship or interest that I had with someone who was monogamous, who was like, oh, that's never going to be a thing for me. So I was like, well, I guess that's the end of this relationship. And then I kind of got into like, okay, I think I actually am polyamorous and this is what I want to pursue. So like my earliest relationships were, especially because I was very sex negative and very afraid, I didn't have a lot of dating experience growing up. I didn't have a lot of like boyfriends, or I had interest in people now and then, but didn't really have very much of that. And then after like my first kind of relationship, which was more or less monogamous, it was long distance and kind of complicated, but I kind of was way more interested in polyamory. And originally I was interested in polyamory specifically because I wanted lots and lots of children, and I wanted to have multiple partners for those children, because I thought, let alone having just me raising my children alone. I want to not just have one partner, but many partners, because I felt like that was much more healthy for children. Like the opportunity to have multiple caregivers was a lot, something that I wanted. And then as time kind of shifted, I became less interested in that. Even though I know some people, when I talk about this in the Anxious Person's Guide, I think some people kind of read that I wanted a lot of children and got immediately kind of shut down and thought that the book was going to be about having lots of children. It's not. I kind of shifted away from like, okay, I want lots of children, to I don't actually want any, to living with my partner, wanting a partner to live with me, and that being really important, to now being solo. So it's been a very interesting journey where I kind of feel like I've touched all of the points, but yeah, that's kind of like the reason I got into it and the reason why I'm still into it. I don't think that I could ever be monogamous in the true traditional sense. I think that always having that freedom and autonomy is really, really important to me, even if I'm not a huge dater necessarily.
Yeah, you don't need to be, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I appreciate the sort of the 50,000 foot sort of arc of it. And I love too, it sounds like what I kind of took away from where you're at with it right now, and maybe even originally, wasn't I want to go and date and get lots of partners and sort of have all these experiences. It was more, if something comes along, I don't want to have to say no. I don't want to have to like be shut down to the possibility. If I meet somebody amazing, I want to be able to explore that for what it is.
Absolutely. And I think I did try to force myself into that box, though. Like, I definitely believed that me not wanting to like go to a bunch of sex parties all the time. And like, originally, I very much thought that this is like my puritanical upbringing, right? That I need to deconstruct this and I need to like become this person. And I have a lot of experiences where I tried to like shove myself into that box and go to parties, and lots of experience in ending up in parties crying alone in a corner because it was so overstimulating. So, I can totally understand why people might feel that way, but it's definitely not a required thing to be polyam.
Yeah. Well, I'd love to go back to the sort of the beginning. I know you kind of said it was like you come out of you've called it now a puritanical upbringing and a lot of sex negativity and shame. And first of all, I think it's amazing that even just to start researching that from a standpoint of like, how do I break out of this? That's even a big step to be able to take when you're like that soaked in the shame and shut down from it all. How were you able to, or maybe what was some of your own personal motivation to start that path of getting out of maybe the darkness of it?
I think that there were a couple things that really helped me. I think firstly was, I do want to know, I like to know more about things and I like to learn.
Yeah.
So I think it was probably by chance that I happened across like I think it was the sex tips community in LiveJournal when LiveJournal was a thing.
Yeah.
And I also like being helpful. And that's like got its own ups and downs aspect to it.
Mhm.
So like, wanting to learn more and reading these things was really important. And then I think I also had like my first relationship that I said like was long distance. That was a kind of opening ground for me because like I used to have a lot of obsessive compulsive thoughts that were associated with being abused. So like one of my obsessive compulsive thoughts was that there were cameras and everything. So like when I took a bath, I would like wrap a washcloth around the shower head because I thought
Yeah.
I didn't really think there was a camera in there, but it was such a strong obsessive thought that I wouldn't be able to bathe without it.
Yeah.
So, and I noticed that with my first partner, like it was long distance. I met him online. He was a friend of a friend. And I was very defensive of this connection because it started and existed online. And that was, back in the days when people were like, you can't be in love with someone you've never met, blah, blah, blah. And so I was very defensive of this. And this relationship was, extremely positive. Like I don't come from a very happy background. And this was one of the first people to like show me love and caring in a way that I'd never experienced before. And I stopped having that obsessive thought. Like I stopped needing to cover up the shower curtain or shower head. And I think that kind of led me on, out of a desire of wanting to be useful, it led me into like, okay, well, I actually want to know more about sexuality because this is going to be part of a relationship. Like it's now less about being like, oh, I'm going to be a good child and a good student and not go to parties and do all those bad things that bad people do. Now it's kind of reframes it in a way of like, I want to be a good partner. So I need to know this stuff, which is like, is that a good thing or is that, but it led to a very good place. So I think that because this had such a strong impact in me, and the other interesting aspect of that relationship is because I had such a strong defense of this, and like I was really like anyone who would have said like you don't know him really, I would have probably just completely raged against. I actually had attraction for other people. Like it was very rare, but I remember being attracted to somebody else. And that kind of dichotomy in my brain of like, okay, I definitely love my partner and I like, this is love and I know it. And then also I'm attracted to this other person. That's interesting. So I can hold those two things at the same time. And that I'm not saying that made me polyamorous, but that was kind of my first step into thinking like
an aha moment.
Yeah, it's not an either or scenario. So
recognizing that you have more capacity there.
Exactly. So I think that like that kind of motivated me into, and like when it's a special interest, like I read as much as possible, I talk about as much as possible, I listen to as many podcasts as possible, and it becomes a thing,
Yeah.
And so that's the path you went on.
Yeah. And it led me, to polyamory, which I did start also like doing as much research. And I do think that backfired in some ways because I do feel like, and one thing that I really talk about a lot now is kind of the danger of what I call the polyamory PhD. And that's kind of this idea that like, if you read and you research, you will be fine and safe. And when you actually start off, you won't have any negative emotions and you won't experience any turmoil. And I had very much similar. I had very much similar the same thought that like, okay, I've researched this, I'm fine. And it led me to denying a lot of my genuine, legitimate concerns and feelings. So I think that there's a good thing about research, but there also is kind of a negative thing at times, especially when it comes to polyamory.
Yeah.
Totally.
I love that you bring that up because I think it's tempting to read all the things, do all the things so that you kind of create yourself this container that feels safe.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that can be really good in some ways. It's great to be educated about things. But what that doesn't take account for is your own emotions and your system and other people's, like dealing with humans and actually lived experience there.
Yeah.
Well, I think I see two kind of things happen with this often. One is I often liken it to learning to swim by reading. And it's like you read, and you're like, okay, well, I've read all the books, I've watched all the videos, so I know how to swim. And you can jump in and you're like, I'm not drowning. There's no way I could be drowning. I read all those books. But on the flip side, there's also I'm not getting in that water. Do you know what's in that water? I've read all the books. I know how scary this is. And so I see that side of it too, where there's sort of this, I'm never going to be prepared enough to jump into the waters of polyamory or non-monogamy because it's so hard and you have to be perfect at it. Otherwise, you're going to cause mass destruction. And so And it's finding that balance of how do I get educated enough, but
Mhm.
not so I don't get so bogged down in it that I can't move.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So you're in this long distance relationship. You've realized you can have multiple attractions and maybe even feelings for multiple people. What did it like? What happens with that?
Yeah.
It's really ironic because that's another thing that kind of led me into the realization because we were long distance. The idea he lived in Australia. The idea was that we were going to wait for each other until he could come to the US, and then that became something that he couldn't do. And
That's a
so he
long,
sort
long
of
distance. Sorry.
it's
That's a
very
very long
and a long
distance.
time to wait. It was
Yeah.
probably like a year or so. So
Wow.
and like I think for me, I didn't have a problem with it because this was the first time that anyone had ever really shown me this kind of love before. So I was like, I could wait forever for this. Like, fine, whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But like he was dealing with a lot of stress and he was like, oh, I don't think I can do that. And I was like, okay, that's fine. And I think because I never I still loved him in my brain. Like that was technically our breakup, but I didn't process it as a breakup because I was just
Mhm.
like, whatever, I care about this person. It doesn't matter to me. And then he was like, oh, I found someone else here that I really want to date. And I was like, okay, that's fine. Still didn't really care. I like
Mhm.
he was someone that I cared about. And it wasn't really until he was like, I have to stop saying I love you because I'm falling for this other person and it's making me feel bad, that the ball like really dropped and I was like, "Oh, this is happening actually." And then the interesting thing about it was that I tried to bargain and I was like, "Well, she can have this time with you, but can you break up with her and then when you come over here, then I can have my time," which is like totally an unfair thing to ask, right? But I didn't know any better.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You're also really young. Yeah, exactly. Figuring
Yeah,
this
you're
out.
just like, yeah, this makes sense. And I think like also had a really big fear of men at the time because of the abuse. Like I chose an all women's school because I had this massive fear, and I also had a lot of paranoia and fear in general about the world. Like there was so much I could have explored during my university times that I just didn't because I didn't want to venture off campus. I didn't want to, I was so afraid of being attacked or hurt that I really limited myself in ways that I kind of regret now. And then as I was looking, I went to an all women's school, but then didn't come out as bi until after I left. So that's also great. Um, like that's awesome timing. And then I lived at my parents' house for a few years before I moved to the UK and went to grad school there. And it was just in that process of like going, maybe this is actually something that I want to try. And I was actively looking for people to date in the UK and actively dating in a way that I hadn't really before.
Even before you moved there.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I was looking for people like in the UK. Well, because I thought, well, I'm going to move there. That's what I want because I was going to go to grad school there and wanted to stay there. And I think that there was a process of, okay, I know this is definitely something that I want because when I was interested in that person, like I said, and I was like, well, I'm bi and I don't want to not ever die without not ever having been with a woman, like,
Mhm.
and he was like, well, I'm monogamy and never will that ever happen. And so I was like, well,
Yeah.
there's no point in us being together then, like,
Right.
because that's basically me saying that I'll never, ever get to have that experience. And I don't want to agree to that. So I think from that, it just naturally ventured on. The first polyam relationship, like, well, not really relationship, but the kind of first semi experience, someone like did kind of use me to cheat without me knowing. And again, that was because I was trying to be okay with everything. There were very clear signs where I definitely now would have never agreed to and definitely would have objected to those things, but I didn't end up finding out until later. But yeah, I think like that's kind of how it went from that point of like that monogamous relationship that I was perfectly fine to be polyamorous so long as he dumped her before he went to, as long as I had my time, I was fine
Yeah.
with it. But to like eventually being explicitly polyamorous.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm curious, and I don't know that there's like an answer to this question, but you've talked about a few times where, well, I think it kind of ties into to the like we can't learn everything from a book, but there's a handful of things already that you've said like I regretted this and I regretted that, or I now look back and I see these things, and I'm curious for you I don't even know the right wording of just how you kind of move through these things and come to that place of just sort of okay. yeah, somebody used me to cheat, and now I have a new framework for that.
Forgiveness?
Forgiveness for the grace for them, grace for you. I don't even know if it is a question. It's just sort of maybe a noticing that, like, that's part of this is, again, you can read every single book and you're still gonna step in the shit.
Yeah. And I mean, I think what motivated me was frustration
Mm,
because in the way that non-monogamous communities used to be online and definitely where I feel like it was very much taboo to be jealous. It was very much like nobody really talked about it. Even though there was no one right way to do polyamory, there very much was an obvious right way that everyone was aiming for, which is right to never be bothered by anything, to be
yeah.
perfectly happy with everything. And I thought, and I kind of trusted in some of the gurus of people that I'd seen online who were like all, very settled in the, and I just really thought, okay, I've trusted in all of this and I'm going to go for it. And then when it didn't work, I was quite frustrated and quite angry about that. And so I started writing about that. And then as I was writing about things, like it wasn't always very well received. Like a lot of times people would get like frustrated with me or say that I was like saying bad things about polyamory or trying to discourage people from being polyamorous. And even like some of the reviews of my book say that, like, this sounds like somebody who doesn't want anyone to be polyamorous. And it's not that. It's just that I was in such an environment that made me feel like even having feelings about this was wrong and that it meant that I wasn't truly polyam. And what I want people to understand is that it's normal to have these feelings and that it's okay. It doesn't mean that you're not polyam. It just, means that you're a human being who's grown up in a monogamous centric society that has told you your whole life this is how love is. Like, and the more that I've understood, like, definitely self-compassion was not something that I was used to or good at in any way, shape, or form. Like, I was very self-attacking. That was a big part of my anxiety and my coping. And over time, I had to learn about self-compassion, learn about like how my nervous system worked, learn about, even some of the stuff that I've talked to other people about is like gentle parenting and authoritative parenting. And even though I'm not interested in being a parent anymore, a lot of these kind of things that I've learned about the brain and how it develops have been extremely helpful in understanding, like, okay, this isn't me attacking myself. This isn't me sabotaging myself. This is me trying to protect myself. And how do I work with that? So I think like it's definitely been a journey, but I think the sitting outside of it is one of the most popular kind of articles that I've written is, I think, like 13 mistakes that I made when trying polyamory, or I think there's also the other 13. I can't remember the titles because I just call it my 101 and 102 articles, or like, 13 things I wish I knew before I tried.
Mm.
And that's just because I was just so angry that this wasn't being talked about and that everyone was kind of operating under the system of, and anytime you brought up these concerns, it was just sort of like a crab bucket thing of like, no, it's fine. It's just that you can't do polyamory. And because of that frustration, I just had to say something. And then the more people kind of said, wow, this really helped me, I was like, okay, well, I'm going to continue to talk about it then. So like out of pure spite rather than self-compassion at first.
Which is a hell of a motivator, and I'm so
Yeah.
glad because I love so much of what you said in there because there is so much of that goes on. If you're not, yeah, you felt jealous. Well, you're not polyamorous. You haven't done the work. You haven't you name the outcome. You haven't done something because you're
Mhm.
feeling this thing, or yeah, why are you having trouble with me doing these things? There's something wrong with you, rather than being able to listen to yourself and say, okay, this maybe there is something I need to work on, but like, can we at least stop and say, I don't, I don't feel good here. This doesn't feel right. And maybe it's just me, but maybe it is a really shitty situation that I shouldn't be in.
Exactly.
And now I'm trying to power through and push through to stay in something that I shouldn't, just because I don't want to rock the boat and I don't want the polyamory police to come after me.
Yeah.
You don't want to
Yeah.
be the wet blanket,
That's
the
right.
non-cool one.
Yeah.
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 Yeah. I really love that you brought this up too. We were just talking about this something very similar last night, and having compassion for ourselves, for being human, for having emotions, for having these things come up. They're not like, so much of it is, rooted in protectiveness of ourselves that has a reason. It's a reason it was there at the beginning, like at some point along the way. And having that understanding and compassion for ourselves, it makes everything so much easier in a way. It's still hard, but you're having to acknowledge and be with those things and work through the feelings and be like, yeah, instead of trying to stuff them down and say that these are wrong,
Exactly.
embracing them.
Yeah. Yeah, and I'm curious, Lola, if you'd be open to sharing a few of the things that you did come up against that you weren't hearing other people talk about. Because again, I think it's easy too to be like, wow, you write all of these help articles and then you've never struggled. You must be so amazing at it and you've never come up against anything. But it sounds like your writing comes from a place of, hey, I actually ran into this shit and it's hard and here's my experience. And I'm curious what a few of the speed bumps, the hurdles that you crashed through were.
Yeah, like my first experience, like I said, it isn't technically a relationship. I was speaking to someone online before I moved to the UK. And there were just lots of times when I didn't feel right about the situation. So, we were talking. Because of my previous experience in long distance relationships, I didn't want to be like, we're in a relationship now. I wanted to wait until we met in person. But we were, definitely super interested in each other and would have been dating if I had been physically in the UK at the time. And there were just, he kind of, I talk about this a little bit in detail in another podcast, so I don't want to go too much into it. But like basically, he said he had another partner. He had never mentioned this person once before. He had never even mentioned them in passing. He tried to convince me that it was a difference in terms of how relationships were defined in the US and the UK, which was total BS. And just some of the things around that like experience, I was like, okay, I would have I felt like my internal sense of like, this is weird. Like, this isn't okay, but I didn't want to be jealous. I didn't want to be the bad person. I didn't want, like, I remember being like, oh, let me friend this person that you're dating. Like, I'll say hi to them. And he was like, no, 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 no. And I was like, why? And he was like, well, I just prefer if you meet in person. And, I did my little mental backflips to say, oh, I guess that makes sense. And I don't want to, be the bad, like, I was very much trying to like make it work. And I did end up finding out. It was quite a funny story, actually. Ended up meeting this person at a party and I knew who they were and I thought they knew who I was because he had said like, I would have been like, but this person knows about me, right? And he was like, yeah, totally they know about you. And I was like, okay,
Mm-hmm.
he even at some point suggested that they would want a threesome. So I was like, okay, this person knows about me. And when I met them at a party, I was like, hi, because I was like, I'm just going to get it over with, which is really brave of me in hindsight.
Yeah.
Yes.
But I was like, I'm just going to get it over with. I was like, hi. And they were like, hi. And I was like, I know this person. Do you know this person? And they were like, he had a very typical dude name. So they were like, I know many people with that name. And I was like, yeah, but this person who's now, luckily, he was vacationing somewhere and didn't come to the party. That would have been interesting. And I was like, oh yeah, I know this person. They were like, oh yeah, I know this person. How do you know this person? And in my inability, like when I'm caught off guard, I find it very hard to lie,
Yeah.
even to the point of like disclosing things that I shouldn't disclose because I just tell the truth. And so I just told the truth. I was just like, well, we were sort of dating, but then it didn't work out so well. But they said that you knew I existed. He said that you knew I existed, but I guess you don't. Like it was
Wow.
very weird. Because I also ended up, the other issue that went on in this relationship, I ended up reading Why Does He Do That by Lindy Bancroft, which I recommend that everybody read because it really, really helps me understand abuse and relationships. And one thing that he would constantly do is he would be kind of mean. And then I would feel like I had to confront him about it. And because I read that book and I noticed he'd like make little comments now and then. Like I remember saying like, oh, I'm in a new place. I need to find my batteries ran. I need to find new batteries. And he was like, that's what Google is for. Just like little things, And then I eventually ended up telling him, I was like, I don't think we should actually meet up when I come to the UK. And he was like, oh, why is that? And I was like, well, you're kind of mean. Like,
Wow.
and then I have to confront you about it. And it makes things awkward and I don't enjoy it. It makes me not want to talk to you. And then he blocked me from everything.
Yeah.
And that was the end. And so when I was talking to this person at the party, I was like, yeah, he's blocked me from everything. Blah, blah, blah. And this person was like, oh, okay. And then ended up tweeting him and being like, I've just met Lola. What's all that about? And then he blocked them from everything. So a wild situation but all of this could have been avoided, right? If I had really listened to my instincts and like questioned more and wasn't so afraid of being like the wet blanket or being the jealous one. Like I was so afraid to be jealous that I just let shit go that I should have not. And that's one good example. Another good example that I always like to bring up, because people feel very beholden to being friends with their metamors. And I really don't think, like, I don't think it's bad if you get along, that's fine. But it's sort of like, if you're in a monogamous relationship, do you force yourself to be best friends with your partner's friends? No, there's no expectation of that. So I just feel like forcing yourself to be in a friendship with someone can create resentment and unhappiness. And I remember, like, because of that experience, I was very much like, okay, now I have to know all of my metamors. I have to meet them because I'm going to get cheated. Like the opposite, you swing, the pendulum goes the other way. And I was forcing myself to interact with this person that my partner was dating. And we didn't not get along. They weren't mean, but we just didn't, like, there's no reason. Like, and I remember I was a really huge bitch. This is a horrible thing to say. But I mentioned that I'd gone to a polyam speed dating thing, and they were like, oh, did you find anyone to date? And I was like, no, I can't like anyone that quickly. I'm not like you. And that's a little rude. I was so rude. That's luckily their English wasn't their first language, so I don't think they really got that I was being rude. But that was a huge mistake I made, because I forced myself to be in those relationships. So there's like a lot of situations where, because of the environment, because I was trying to be perfect, because I wanted to follow all the rules and be, there is a right way to do polyamory and the way that people, and I wanted to be that right way. And I forced myself in so many situations where it wasn't good for anyone involved. And I have a lot of those. So do as I say, not as I do.
Well, that I love that, because it proves the point that you can try to stuff it down, but it's going to squeeze out around the edges, and it's going to come out in shitty ways. You're going to build the resentment. You're going to say something snarky, and you're forced to listen to yourself at a certain point. You can only run from it for so long.
Yeah, there's a saying, I don't know who invented it, but I heard it and it's really great. It was like, emotions are like children. You shouldn't let them drive the car, but you shouldn't throw them in the trunk either.
Yeah. Let's acknowledge they're there. Let's feel them. Yeah. So easy to do, though.
Yes.
Yeah.
To do either let them drive or to throw them in the trunk.
Yeah.
We don't learn a lot of the middle ground. Yeah, it's either we're going to let them run our lives, or we're going to just ignore them completely.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
Not that I've done that, but I could imagine.
So I'm curious, you've had all these experiences early on and making mistakes throughout life, because we're all human.
We never stop.
But did you ever find your stride at all, or kind of where did you land after you moved to the UK and started dating more people?
I think what helped me, I think I will continue to make mistakes, like, obviously. But I think what helped me first was, not everybody is in an area where the community that they have access to is really good. And I kind of had to learn that, okay, maybe the immediate community that I have around me isn't really the best. I actually knew a lot of polyam people who weren't in the community because of the community. So I think what helped me was going, okay, if I'm judging myself against these people, then it's not a good thing. Stepping away from that, I think, really helped. I also think, to be honest, like, I had a relationship with someone who was extraordinarily patient with me. And I think that helped immensely. It was a sort of thing where we were both super anxious people, but the response to my anxiety was for them to be less anxious, thankfully. And so that was really, really helpful, because I really struggled with having healthy confrontation. I could cuss someone out and I could tell them to go to hell. And I could, once I learned how to cut people out of my life who were super toxic to me, that was great. But you can't cut everyone out. Not everyone should be cut out, right? So, like, I learned that extreme skill, but I didn't really learn how to have healthy confrontation. And obviously, like, therapy was an immense amount of help as well. But I think having those confrontations and coming out of the other end and going like, okay, I didn't die, everything's fine, that was really helpful. I think another thing, like, my therapist, probably one of those big, like, mic drop therapy moments, right, that you have sometimes, was I was complaining to my therapist because so many times I'm a person who likes to, I like to debate, and I don't see a problem with debating or arguing. And I actually think that makes things stronger. It makes your argument stronger. It makes the community stronger. Even if you disagree, I think you actually get to know people better when you argue with them. And that's not always welcome in many communities. I end up being a problem in a lot of communities because I'm willing to argue. Sometimes I've been too willing to argue and I haven't let stuff go. I get it. I've been the one who needs to have the last word. I could be extremely annoying, 100%, but I valued that a lot. And I was telling my therapist, like, so many of these communities I'm going into and I'm asking these questions and they're throwing me out. And she's like, I noticed that in your communities, you think that arguing and conflict brings you closer together. But when it comes to your relationship, you think any conflict is like a crack and it's going to eventually break the relationship. Why is it that you think that conflict brings people together in communities, but it doesn't bring you closer to your partners? And I was like, oh, yeah, that's a thing. And that was like a kind of a moment of like, okay, yeah, you're right. Oh shit, actually. Yeah. And that was really, really helpful of just that. And then I think as well, learning, like I said, about the nervous system, learning about how my brain worked, like that was a big thing. So I think there have been always like moments of up and downs. I think especially when I was in a relationship and we built trust over time. The thing I'm really grateful for in that relationship as well is that, I do end up dating social butterflies. I do end up dating people who are extroverts, who love parties. And it's always been a thing of like, oh, I'm not fun. I'm going to be the not fun partner. And I'm going to, and dealing with that and having someone go, you know what? Yeah, you don't go to parties with me. That's fine. There are other things to do than go to parties, and it's okay. But having to balance that, like having to be with someone who is super interested in that, who is super patient with me, I think was really helpful. And I think when we built up that trust, because I do know that in the beginning, you're going to have these ups and downs because you're still building that trust with one another. And then as you kind of learn, okay, they go to a party, the first couple of times my partner went to a different party or like was staying overnight or something like that, we had like a goodbye call because that kind of like grounded me a little bit, or a good night call. I shouldn't say goodbye. A good night call because that grounded me a little bit. But over time, I didn't need that. More and more, like I didn't need that. More and more, I didn't really even, as long as the sexual health thing remained the same, like it was fine. And we changed a lot of our agreements and a lot of the things that we agreed with each other so that we could be more flexible with each other. And I think that was really helpful. So, I think I wouldn't say, I always like to avoid, I want people to avoid thinking that they need to be fully healed before they're in a relationship, or that, they need to be in some sort of perfect state of mental health. I think I'm much better now. Like I don't have panic attacks in the same way I did. I don't feel like I have generalized anxiety disorder anymore. Like I do feel like I've come a long way. But, shit happens and life can turn upside down on you without you knowing. So, I think I have benefited like slowly over time. I feel like I've gotten better and better. And my hope is to continue that. And I feel like even the best thing I've learned about now is that being solo, figuring out like, oh, actually, I'm actually dating myself in a way now. I'm learning because I've spent so much of my life feeling like I need to be useful, right? I need to be useful to be loved. And that's how I get love, is by being useful. And I have a really big problem with like to fill any gap of responsibility. It's like, how some people can't stand silence in a conversation. They immediately need to speak. I feel the immediate need to feel the responsibility gap, even when no one's freaking asked me, right? I'm like, okay, I'll fix it. I'll be the grown up and I'll do it. Like no one's asked me. And the result is resentment and like constantly feeling like you're taking care of everyone else except yourself. And so even now I feel like being solo has really given me this like, okay, I can take care of myself. And that has made me like so much better in the long run. So yeah, it's been a journey. It's a lot of stuff, but I think I'm in a stride now because I feel like I'm not going to just choose a relationship for the sake of being lonely. I'm not lonely. And I'm also valuing other relationships in my life and prioritizing those relationships. And that's only been like a really, really good thing for me.
Yeah. So many relatable things in there. I'm a
Yes, yes.
responsibility gap filler to the extreme. So I feel a lot of that, Lola. And I also love to just so much of what you shared is about how what we do in life is we learn by trying. And I like
Yeah.
and making mistakes, call them mistakes or just call them opportunities to learn, right? We're just figuring out who we are and trying. And I think, you'd said early on that you're just really curious and you want to learn and you want to do the things. And it's like it feels like there was a almost like a shift to like doing it experientially rather than from a book. Like you had to move from the book learning to the street learning.
Mhm.
And then there's a whole new set of things to learn in that moment.
Yeah. The only I can just think of the acronym AFOL, another fucking opportunity to learn.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah.
I think there's an aspect of like experience because I don't think, I definitely don't want to discourage people from reading. Obviously, like I wrote
No,
a
for
book that'd
sure.
be really dumb
Yeah.
and
For
not
sure.
beneficial for me. But like I do think, some relational issues are solved in relation,
Mm-hmm.
and you can't fix them by not being like they have to be fixed while you're in the situation.
Totally. I feel like your example of, having the good night call with your partner a few times and then that sort of gets to a place where, okay, I don't need to do that anymore, right? You're going to probably get that feeling through doing that experience rather than reading the how to say good night to your partner chapter in a book, right? You kind of have to do that.
Yeah,
And also to realize that you might get to that place with this partner and 5 years later you're in another relationship and you're like, oh shit, I need that good night call.
exactly.
And that's not oh, I went backwards and I've failed all the way back to 5 years ago. That's what I'm fucking needing right now because I need it for whatever reason. And that's okay.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I'm curious how have things shifted for you? It sounds like quite a bit moving the last couple of
Mhm.
years. And what does that look like?
So I feel like, originally I always had this typical idea of like, first I had a very typical idea of like, okay, I'm interested in polyamory. It's because I want to have lots and lots of children. This is what I want to do. I want to have multiple caregivers for them. I want to have like a big, massive family. And I think part of that was, that I am estranged from my parents. Like I don't have family connections. So I do feel like part of that was like, how do I replace this aspect that's missing in my life? And then over time, like, that kind of went away. I think it's because like the reality of what that means, like having children and not just in a physical sense, which also is something that I'm not keen on, but the responsibility of what that means kind of actually did sort of sink in for me. And I'm like, oh, I don't know if I really am able to do this. And then I always also had an idea of like, okay, I always want to live with a partner. Like I have to live with a partner. I am blind, and when I am my disability means that like most people with my disability are completely blind. And the idea that like, okay, eventually one day I might lose my sight and then I'm going to need a partner to live with me. I'm going to need help, And so I always had this idea of I have to live with a partner. Living with a partner is really important. And I just plain missed them, like
Mhm.
it was a struggle to say goodbye
Yeah.
when I was dating somebody and and when the opportunity came up for them to stay with me both times, I was like, yeah, dude, let's do this. And I do enjoy that aspect of like homemaking. Like I won't say that I dislike that, but I also just assumed that I was incapable of living alone. I was scared of it in the same way that I was scared of a lot of things growing up because I was like, oh, the world's dangerous. I need protection. I need, and I think that being able to have that experience, it's also, living alone or being able to live semi-alone in any kind of case is really impossible in London unless you're a banker. It's just not possible. Like most people, even when I didn't have any relationships, I was still living with flatmates because it's just not possible physically, like economically. It's just not
Yeah.
going to happen. And, I lived in the UK for 12 years. I lived in London. Over time, I kind of stopped feeling like London was home. It just felt really busy. There was it was becoming more and more expensive. And I thought, well, maybe I'll move to Scotland. And then I thought, well, if I'm going to move countries, one of my best friends lives in Malmo in Sweden. So I was like, well, if I'm going to move countries, I may as well move countries. Like, why not just go to Sweden? I'd been to Sweden plenty of times and I really liked it. So I was like, well, why not just move? And then I ended up getting a job in Sweden. I got really lucky, essentially. And then a lot of like Sweden has one of the highest percentages of single people in I think Europe and I think in the world. It's very, very normal for people to live on their own in Sweden. It's also very, very normal. Like marriage is not like you don't have to get married, and a lot of people don't. Like it's not super common to be married. You call it a sambo, which means that you live together. But a lot of people have been sambos for ages. Like it comes from samaboenda, which means living together or same living, and they don't ever get married. So that I think was interesting to shift into. And then I think as well, like just as a human living in a country where English is not the like a lot of Swedes speak English. I'm not trying to say that it's hard because it's really not. But living in a country where it's not the primary language, and especially if you're someone who's always kind of prided yourself on your ability to communicate, or you've always kind of gotten a little bit of your self-esteem from being smart and how you communicate. Once I was in like my Swedish for Immigrants classes and I was trying to, I remember we sometimes we'd bring up controversial subjects to talk about. And I'm like, oh, I can't actually speak. Like I can't formulate my arguments. And it's a very humbling experience. And I really think that just as everyone says you should work in the service industry, I do very much think you should live in a country where your primary language is not spoken.
Totally agree with that. I love that.
Especially like I remember even when I moved here and I was like, oh, I should get a library card to like support the local library. And then it kind of hit me. I was like, oh, wait, I can't read. I mean, they have books in English, but like it hit like that kind of like, I can't read. It's very, very humbling. And I think that also kind of shifted my perspective a little bit. But yeah, kind of being able to be more solo and more focused on myself, like it's helped me a lot with self-confidence because I'm like, I can live on my own. Like things are figure outable. Like I don't have to be with one other person, like in the same household thing. And that was really, really helpful. So I think, it's been a shift in things. And I think we'll see how, like, I'm kind of open to see how things go. Like, I very much doubt that I will be monogamous because of lots of reasons, but, I don't know. It could happen, I guess, if is a very understanding monogamous person who had a very flexible, fluid definition of monogamy, maybe, maybe, but I'm just kind of open to see where things go. And I'm kind of focused on like, I'm an amateur strongman athlete as well. So like focusing on like doing that, focusing on like learning a new language, has been taking up a lot of my time. But yeah, I think I think I can only be stronger as I keep going with like what I'm learning and as I'm growing. And it's been a wild and crazy ride.
Yeah.
It sure sounds like it.
Yeah. I'm curious how you've noticed in this, because I loved what you said about everyone should spend some time living somewhere where they don't speak the language. And I think there's just so much that we get when we go and embed ourselves in another culture for a little while to, how do they do, language? How does food work? How do all these different aspects of life work? And I'm curious what you've notice for yourself in terms of like how do relationships work? I did love what you said where the guy you were dating long distance in the UK was like, oh, we do that differently over here. Like, oh yeah, we drive on the left side of the road and cheating isn't cheating over here, right? Like it's like
wild.
Wait, what? But I'm curious what you have noticed, like differences in how you've navigated relationships in the different locations or what you've maybe found culturally different as you've moved around different locations.
Yeah, I mean, one thing I'd say is that I'm probably a lot more culturally Scandinavian than I am American. And that's because like I do keep to like one thing you'll hear Americans and British people as well say it's really hard to make friends in Sweden. And I think that's because people generally who grow up here already have their friendship circles. And it just takes a little bit longer of a time for you to get to know them or for them to kind of behave differently. I don't think it's hard to make friends. Like I've made friends quite easily, but I think if you expect to be embedded into somebody's life really, really quickly, that's probably not going to happen. And you are going to have to make a little bit more of an effort than just like going to the pub and striking up a conversation. So I think that's one thing that I've experienced. I think that like I didn't date very much in the US. So a lot of my dating has been in the UK. And I think that one thing that I've noticed, like I haven't dated tons in Sweden, but interestingly enough, one of my first experiences, and I was kind of open, like I didn't explicitly say polyamory because I think I was, I'm open to like what happens in life. But I spoke to this person who it was so awesome. Like the first gif he sent to me was like, because I'm quite short, he sent me this like, and he's quite tall. He sent me this gif from Princess Bride where it was like, "Hello down there," and like we had such good conversations, and like he'd send me long paragraphs, I'd send him long paragraphs back. Like he asked me questions, I asked him questions, and it really set the bar quite high because like I know that not everyone's good at digital communication. I know that, lots of people struggle with that for lots of reasons, but that really, really helped me see like, okay, this is what I actually want. I want to, when I am getting a message from someone, I want to be excited that I've gotten that message. I want to be excited to respond. I don't want to feel like it's a chore.
Yep.
And I don't want to feel like I'm having to pull, like I have like journalistic training background. So I know how to ask open-ended questions. I know like how to ask something so I don't get a yes or no answer.
Yep.
And still within a lot of dating, I'll get like pulling teeth conversations where I'm just like, you know what? And I used to force myself to go on dates all the time because I'm not attracted to people very often. Sometimes I thought, well, maybe it'll kick in later. Like maybe I'll feel a certain way after I get to know the person. And I'd force myself to go on all of these kind of dates, and it's just didn't feel anything, no vibe, and that's fine. So I'm really, really glad I had that experience because I think now I know, like, for sure, this is what I want. And I don't know if that's because he was Swedish. I do feel like there has been data that has shown, and don't cite me on this, go research it yourself. But from what I've gathered, like from personal experience, as well as things that I've blithely read, is that there is a lot more of an equal gendered expectation in Sweden around like housework and things like that, that it's not that like there isn't this kind of like weight of having to manage the household that women have to face.
Mhm.
There also is like, there is parental leave here, not just maternity leave. It can be shared between both partners. And quite often both partners do take paternity and maternity leave and parental leave. And now as well, you can even give parental leave days to family members or people who take care of your kids. They can actually take parental leave to help you. So that's like really great. So
Wow.
I think there is a bit more of a give and take in that regard. And I think I haven't been explicitly, because again, like that guy set the bar so high. Now I'm like, if I get like 2 messages in and I don't want to say bored, that's quite harsh, but like if I feel like it's not reciprocal, I just
Yep.
have no more tolerance for that anymore. I
Yeah.
just have zero tolerance. And I think that's good. Like I don't waste my time a lot more than I used to. But that is a big thing. But yeah, I think there's lots of differences culturally, but I think the thing that I'm most glad about is just being able to see what it is that I want, because it's so hard actually. Every relationship I think has given me an idea of what I do want and what I don't want, and has only helped me learn that more. And now that I know exactly what it is that I want, yeah, maybe I date less, maybe I don't have as many relationships, but I don't waste my time either,
Mhm.
which I think is more important.
Yeah.
Yeah, the experiences you do have are good ones. They're the ones that fit, rather than you're sort of narrowing. You're using all the data to narrow down to something closer to what you want.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah, I do too. And I'm curious too, you wrote the Anxious Person's Guide to Non-Monogamy, and this new Non-Monogamy journal that just came out. What was some of your, I guess, motivation for both of those?
With the Anxious Guide, I actually got approached by Jessica Kingsley Publishers to ask if I wanted to write a book. And I was like, well, the article that I have, that I call my 101 article, is basically like, I could expand on that and make that into an actual book, which is what I ended up doing. So that was kind of the motivation. And my goal is really, if somebody feels like, one, I think that everyone is going to be anxious trying non-monogamy. Like, I don't think that you have to have an anxiety disorder to feel anxious about it. I think that is totally normal.
Agreed.
And I actually fought with my publisher a little bit about the title because they were kind of worried that it would limit the audience. And I was like, no, everyone is anxious. Like, and maybe like we could have expanded it to sort of like anxiety and non-monogamy, but I do think that it's normal to be anxious. And my goal with that is just to help people understand that like it's okay if you are. It doesn't mean that there's anything wrong with you. And just to like, it's not a scientific book. It's not a book filled with lots of different facts and lots of different research. And some people have felt like it was more memoir, and I can understand why. But the goal really is to just help people feel like they're not alone. Because I do think that like as the saying goes, a problem shared is a problem halved. And I do think that, the more that you know that you're not alone, the better. And I don't think people have examples of non-monogamy. They don't have often a community. They don't have a cultural script. They don't have anything to tell them like this is normal. And if only the only thing that they have is just a voice going like, well, if you're feeling anxious about this, then you're not really non-monogamous. There's nothing really to counteract that. So that was my goal with that. With the non-monogamy journal, I felt like part of the problem that a lot of people have, especially like when they write to me, when I get questions, I feel like it's the shock of the situation as well as the situation that makes things super difficult. And I think if we think about like monogamy and its normalization in society, all forms of media represent monogamy in some way or form or fashion. So in that regard, you get to see different problems that arise in monogamy in lots of different ways. And even if you don't necessarily think it could happen to you, and even if it's out, completely out of the box, you get to kind of put yourself in that situation and go, what would I do in that situation? And then when similar things arise, even if you don't have an immediate community, and usually can ask friends, and you can usually get a sounding board of some regard.
Yep.
You still have a kind of backing of like, okay, I've seen this before. 9 times out of 10, Reddit relationships probably has a few of the weirder ones where, that people have experienced. With non-monogamy, you don't have that.
Yeah.
Like, not only do you have no cultural script for this, which your brain is freaking out about because it's like, this is dangerous. And then you don't have, unless you completely absorb yourself into lots of different forms of non-monogamous entertainment, you don't see those things either. Because even like as many amazing resources about non-monogamy and polyamory there are, they don't always talk about the problems fully necessarily. And sometimes they only cover them a little bit, and sometimes they only talk about them after they're already solved. And so you don't end up with an exposure to a wide variety of situations or things that come up. And what I wanted to do with the journal was like take there's some random scenarios in there, but there are like some very common things that people should just think about. Because I do think that if you have the chance to sit down and go, how would I react in this situation? Then you at least have a starting point for like what your boundaries are. A really good scenario in there that it's not super common, but I think a lot of people don't really think about is, for example, I have a scenario in there where, someone from high school or an old flame or someone that you were interested in, but it never kicked off, has added you on a social media network. They can see that you're married. They don't know that you're non-monogamous, but they know that you're married. They start flirting with you. And you're kind of like, oh, I'm excited because like this is a person, but they don't know that you're non-monogamous, and the flirting kind of kicks up a notch. So what do you do then? Like, yeah, you could tell them you're non-monogamous, but are you really wanting to date someone who knows that you're married, who knows that you're with someone, and is totally clearly fine with you cheating?
Yeah.
So things like that, like unless that's not, it is great fodder for a television show.
Yeah.
And I'm kind of scared for it to be in a television show, to be honest with you, because I truly don't trust media to convey healthy polyamory and any that they barely convey healthy monogamy, let alone. So, those kinds of situations, it's like, what would I do in this scenario? What would I do if it happened to my partner? What if my partner is like, well, I don't care if they think I'm cheating. Doesn't bother me.
Yeah. Yeah.
Are you okay with that? Like, so there's lots of things like that I wanted to just give people an introduction to think about. Like by themselves, you don't have to have a partner to like do the journal, but by themselves or with a partner just to see. Because sometimes I definitely had it happen in my relationships where like I'm very against cheating, not cool with it for obvious, like for many reasons. I've been used to cheat more than once, unfortunately. And I actually ended up with someone where they were like, I don't know if I mind helping someone cheat. Like, it doesn't really bother me because it's none of my business. And I was like, ooh. And then when we were put in a situation where they were interested in somebody who they knew was cheating, I was like, okay, I don't want to control what you do, but at the same time, my morals and ethics in this situation feel compromised because now I know that somebody's being cheated on. I feel like it's my moral obligation to tell them they're being cheated on, even though, should I do that? Like, so it's situations like that. It's a lot easier to deal with them when they're hypotheticals than when
Yeah.
real situation. So that's why I'm hoping they can deal with it in a hypothetical sense without having to deal with it if and when it really happens.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I love how the journal also breaks it up into the different structures, or themes, not different structures, the different themes, because then somebody can grab the book and be like, I really want to focus on boundaries or the emotions and just sit with those things. And when you think about it in the abstract way and hypothetical way, it can be so much easier than to when you actually confront it.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you also have we talked about the written work you've got. I want to give you a chance too to talk about your podcast. And I had a question about community before we let you go as well.
Yeah. I mean, just my podcast, basically people send me questions. I answer them to the best of my ability. If people are welcome to, there's options to record. I'm not like set up fully like Dan Savage's with like a number you can call in.
Yeah.
Although I did get to go on Dan Savage's show and I did tell him that I wanted his job when he was done. I was quite transparent about that. But you can record your own question or you can send it in. You can choose whether you'd like it to be in a column or a podcast. It's totally up to you. But anything that, there are things that I've answered before, but I really have no problem like answering things again because I do think that, it's hard for people to go through review, especially if they're dealing with a lot of emotional stuff. I do try to get to people within like 7 working days. But like, I definitely make sure people know this is not an emergency service.
Yeah.
And I think I know a lot from my experience, but I'm not a therapist and I'm never wanting to pretend to be something that I'm not. Like I'm not a guru. I don't want to be those things that I actually looked up to and thought were perfectly figured out because I'm definitely not perfectly figured out. But I think, what I can offer is just that. People seem to think that my advice is helpful. And so
Yeah.
I'm hoping that it's helpful. Like I always end every podcast and call it with, I hope it helps and good luck, because genuinely that's how I feel. It's another perspective and hopefully that gives you some type of insight that you need for whatever situation you have.
Yeah, it helps you think about it in a different way. And I did a little bit of like a Q&A segment on our show for about a year and a half with somebody else. And we did answer the same questions or variations of them multiple times. And what I noticed too was, what I thought about this today versus 6 months ago versus a year ago, or even just the mood I'm in, I might think about it in a different way. I might say it in a different way, and it might just give somebody a different perspective to think about. So I love that. And the question I actually had about community ties right into that, where you were talking about not being a guru, being the opposite of the guru. And you also talked a little bit earlier about sort of the way you would challenge community. And I think there's something really healthy in that as well. When, maybe there's the tact and the finesse of how to do it, but just curious for you now, like, how do you engage and interact with community, and like, what role does community play? Because I know it can, like, so community is a big part of what we do. We've got our virtual community. We talk about it every week, but it can get, like, it's a thing that we're mindful of, is to not have these dogmatic views of, if you're not doing it this way, then you can't be part of our community. Or if, think like this, think like us, versus how do we support everybody's individual autonomy and differences in this without it being, this is the right way to do it.
I think that the most important thing for people and engaging in communities, and the thing that I always keep in mind, regardless of what kind of community is, doesn't matter, is always be willing to, don't be afraid to speak out about things that you feel strongly about. And obviously there are tactful ways to do things. There are appropriate channels in different communities, and that's fine. And I do think that there is an element in some communities of, handling, like, I think there's nuance in handling where different people are at in different stages of their lives, right? Like, I had to deal with this a lot when I was in, like, my Swedish for Immigrants classes. Like, it's free education. I'm really excited and happy and extremely blessed that I get to have that. And so I don't take that for granted. But I'm not in community. Like I think one of the people that I was practicing Swedish with was actually like a quite hardcore anti-vaxxer, which I very much disagreed with. But I had nuance and space for that. But I think, never be afraid to say something if you disagree. I think that any community, I'm not a fan of being in any community where I'm not allowed to disagree with people. I'm not allowed to voice my opinion about things, because I do think that you should be, as long as you're tactful and respectful of people, you should be able to disagree. There are going to be communities where they have certain rules. Like I have communities that I'm in that, for lots of different reasons, don't want any mention of AI. They don't want anybody to talk about it. It's just not something they want. And that's like, there are lots of ways that I could talk about it, but if they don't want that, that's fine. But I think you should be allowed, like we talked about it. It wasn't like it was just banned and ice. So, and people are allowed to ask why. So I think that's the biggest thing. Never be in any community that demonizes you for asking why or asking for an explanation. And I do think that is really, really important. I do think sometimes communities become so hegemonic and so intense and so much about like protecting the sort, almost like as if everyone's really fragile and can't handle it. And I really think if you want to change the world and if you want to have a good, healthy community, people need to be able to ask why, even if you're kind of frustrated and tired of explaining, right? Like there's a quote from Thomas Sankara, and I may be saying that name completely wrong and I apologize. It's sort of like when we explain, the people can't help but to follow us. Like we should never get tired of explaining. And I try really hard to not get tired of explaining. So yeah, you're allowed to ask why. I think also be very wary. And one thing that I notice in polyamorous communities especially is be very wary of putting anyone on a pedestal. Be very wary of believing that because people are super popular that they have everything all together.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes it's just that a lot of people, like I'll be extremely blunt, sometimes it's just that a lot of people want to sleep with them so they won't call them out on their behavior. So be very wary of that. Don't assume that experience and having lots of experience or having lots of partners means that someone's a good person or that they're even a good partner. It's definitely not necessarily always the case. And I think that don't be like, leave if something isn't serving you. Like there are billions of people on this planet. I know it gets like scary and I know it's hard to leave some places, especially if you feel like you fit in, but you will find somewhere else, so be sure, like leave if it's really not serving you and you're really not feeling at home. Like don't try to force yourself. The same thing, like don't force yourself to be in situations that really don't serve you. And I think polyam people are really bad at that sometimes, because like you stay in relationships because you don't have to break up. So you stay in relationships you shouldn't stay in because there's no reason to break up. Sometimes not wanting to be there is a good reason.
Yep.
Yes.
Totally.
Yes.
Totally. Well, and I think too, when you speak up and when you can be the person to ask questions in a community, you will inevitably find the other people who had those same questions or concerns. They will usually reach out. They will, +1 to this or upvote it or whatever methodology exists. And so it's also a way for you to then find, people who are maybe a little more like you, right? That you can build maybe some subset of a community for yourself, so
Yeah.
There's so many ways to do this. I appreciated everything you said, because there are things that we try to tell people all of these things all the time. And it's just wonderful to hear from somebody else, right? Like, yeah.
Yeah. And I think too, like, when you're speaking up, like people are going to be frustrated sometimes. People are going to, people are people. They're not always going to be like fully there. But I do genuinely think, like, as long as you are approaching something respectfully, like even if somebody came at me and was like, I don't understand what all this non-binary stuff is. Like, what does that even mean? I'm happy to explain it as long as they're being respectful, as long as they're not insulting me, as long as they're willing to listen. Yeah. I'm happy to explain anything to anybody about anything that I know, even if it's really personal. And I think if you are in a community where you're asking a question and you know that you are trying your best to be respectful and you're apologizing if you've said anything because you don't know the right way to phrase things.
Yeah.
If then people are still being a jerk to you, you can also walk away too. Because there are, like, some people don't have the emotional capacity. It's fine. But I equally think if you don't have the emotional capacity, then just walk away from the situation. Yeah. So, genuinely, if you were coming at it, and ignorance is not a thing to be ashamed of. We all start off ignorant. We all have to start somewhere. that's the first step is to learning, is to not knowing. And there's a lot of things that a lot of us don't know. Like, not knowing is the human condition. But if you can approach it with kindness and with respect, as much as respect as possible, then especially in a community, you should get that in return.
Yeah.
That's beautiful.
Yes. Thank you, Lola. That.
And I think too, if your community leaders can have that they aren't putting that air out there, that I know everything, listen to me, just do it this way, right? That they have the ability to be humble and say, oh, I might not know everything, or I might have messed up, or I did mess up, that goes a long way.
Yeah.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for this conversation. I'm like, I have a million more questions for you, but that's for another time. So
yeah, no worries.
Thank you for your time, for everything you shared, and for all of the amazing work that you do as well.
Thank you.
Links to everyone listening to your work will be in the show notes.
Yeah.
And is there anything else you wanted to share before we let you go today?
No, I mean, well, if I have a moment to talk about one of my special interests that's not polyam related, but which I think is very useful, if you haven't heard about death positivity, then you should. And I know that you might be freaked out, but that's okay. It's talking about sex won't get you pregnant. Talking about death won't kill you.
That's right.
Definitely check out death positivity. Learn more about, like, if you don't have an advance directive in the US, especially if you're queer or you're trans, please make sure you have an advance directive. There's a really wonderful person named Lola Arthur who writes about kind of like accepting death and facing death, which I think most people should do, because I do think that a lot of fears boil down to a fear of death. And death positivity has been a really important thing for me and really, really helpful for me in my anxiety. So don't be afraid of it. Check out like Lola Arthur, and Going with Grace is her. She's a death doula, which is something that I really wanted to be, which is where she helps people at the end of life, like reckon with what's happening with them. But definitely check her out. I think she has some amazing things to say. And it's also Caitlin Doughty is one of the books that I recommend at the end of The Anxious Person's Guide is Caitlin Doughty's book. So do check out those people. And I also hope that helps.
Yeah, I love that you added that, because it is it's similar to sex, like you said. You want to talk about death too. So thank you for adding that.
Wonderful. Well, thank you, Lola. And have a wonderful evening, and we'll talk. I think we're going to get to do this again, so we'll talk soon.
That'd be awesome. Thank you. I really appreciate you having me.
And we're back. Thank you so much, Lola, for coming on, sharing everything you did today, and for all of the incredible work that you do. Again, a reminder, links to all of Lola's work are in the podcast show notes and in your podcast player.
Yes, and thank you from my side as well, Lola. It was wonderful to chat, and we hope to send a whole bunch of people your way. Please go buy Lola's book, get the journal, and check out her podcast.
A quick reminder that our next community workshop is coming up June 25th, 2025 with Orit Krug on releasing the fear of abandonment. More information is over on the community tab of our website.
Come join us.
Yes, come join us.
Come join the community. Come join the workshops. We'd love to have you. And a reminder that next week, you know it, we'll be back with another interview.
We do. This time we're bringing Wendy and Jenna back on the podcast. They were previously on episode 209 3.5 years ago.
It's been a little while.
Yeah.
We got an update. It was a really fun conversation. High energy, lots of laughs, lots of fun.
So come back and listen then.
We'll see you in a week.
Bye, everyone. Thanks for listening.